Alright, so welcome back. So this is part 2 of the new PC build. In the first part we went through all the components that I'm looking to stuff into this case. So let's get on with the build now and let's get the case out of the box and start putting it all together. And hopefully it will work. Alright, so this is the Lian 011 Dynamic Evo XL case. It is a bit of a monster, which is nice to have all the room for everything. Although I'm not planning on doing water cooling on this instance, you never know, I might upgrade it to water cooling next year. And the reason I say that is when this unit is running here in Cyprus in my office in summer, it turns the office into, or certainly this one, the old PC turns the office into an absolute oven. And I'm thinking, well, I'll maybe put water cooling into it and then I can always put the water cooling radiator outside. So we'll maybe do that in the future, but let's see how we go on first. Box of bits. Alright, so I have removed the top panel, the front glass and the side glass panels and the right hand side metal panel, and we've exposed all the internals so I can see what exactly I've got to play with here. I've stuck it in the centre of the room on its box that it came in, and I've got this mouse pad that I can just sit it on top of, and this will allow me to spin it around and work on it without having to worry about bumping into things. So around the back of the unit, so this is in behind the right hand side panel, we can see we've got this hinged panel for mounting SSDs on, and we've got another set of hinged drawers for holding 3.5 inch or 2.5 inch SSDs, so there is lots of room for storage inside this unit if that's what you're looking for. And then we've got the space here for the power supply and all the cabling that's pre-built in for the drive trays, which are on backplane mounted plugs on the back of the doors. So the first thing to do, I dare say, is to loosen up all these cables, which are held in with these these Velcro ties, and we'll mount the power supply and see how it's going to fit. Alright, so here in the power supply box you get the usual manual and things. There's also a bag that's got the screws, some cable combs for managing all your cables, a whole bunch of zip ties, 4 screws for mounting the power supply unit, and some more Velcro ROG cable ties, and a sticker for going on your case, I assume. In the box, power supply itself, as you'd expect, fully modular, and it comes with both Europe and UK power supply cables. And inside this bag you've got all the different modular connectors that we would need for our components, so we don't need that yet. And if I flip the tray open, we can see where I'm going to be mounting the CPU, the PSU. So that will go into this space here. I will need to move this cable clamp bracket as it's interfering with the power supply. So that just popped out, and there we go, the power supply is in place. So we can screw it into position. Alright, so next up we've got the motherboard to do. So here's the motherboard still in its packet. Now we just need to make sure that the standoffs on the case are aligned to the motherboard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 standoffs. And all 9 of them are already installed in the right slot or in the right spots for this motherboard, which is great. So I can remove the peels, the back plate, and the other thing that we need to do at this stage before we mount the motherboard is to install off the NZXT CPU cooler the back plate that goes onto the back of the motherboard. So that should just clip through, and now we can screw the motherboard in place. Okay, that appears to be locked in place. Faceplate is sitting, or the back plate is sitting square. So next we can install the 4 standoffs that hold the CPU cooler. So they go into that back plate that we fed through earlier. Now I haven't yet screwed in the motherboard, so if they do drop out I can easily get back to it without having to unscrew the motherboard. So I'll just screw these in place. Alright, and from the box of screws that came with the case, I've pulled out 9 of the screws for the motherboard mount and we can start installing them. So next up we're going to install the SSDs which go underneath these heat sinks here, so I just need to remove these covers and under this one. So we need to remember to remove the thermal pad plastic coating. So there's going to be one SSD going in this slot here and another SSD going in that slot there. That's that one locked in place. And that's them both locked in. Put this cover back on. And that lined up. And that's the heatsink in place. So the next thing I'm going to do is install the CPU. So I've just cut the packaging. Oh, don't want to damage the motherboard. It's falling out here. Let's move this to the side. I don't know how this opens. And there we have the processor. Pop down the retention spring. Lift the cover. Check the pins. Everything's good. Check the orientation. And place it in the CPU. Seems to be the right way. And cover it down. There we have it, one CPU. So the next thing I want to do is work out how I'm going to mount the CPU cooler. So some of the things I need to think about is obviously if I'm putting a fan on the back here as an exhaust, where's the tubes going to impact? I've got to think about the height of the RAM, which is probably up here somewhere. I've got plenty of space though on this top rail to mount it. This whole fan tray assembly comes off, and as does the dust filter, so I'll move that out of the way so it doesn't get damaged. So if I do a configuration like so with the radiator directly onto the mount, then that means I can still get space in here for the fans, and if I put the CPU there, cooler there, it should be okay for the GPU, but it'll be pushing against the fans. So if I do it the other way, then those tubes may push against the RAM, which obviously we don't want, although I could take them up slightly, stand them off. But what I'm thinking, I can always rotate the pump. So if I put it back the first orientation and then rotate the pump 90 degrees, we should be able to get a good clearance of the fan at the back, as well as have the hoses for the pump coming down without impacting the GPU. So I think that is the orientation we'll go for. So the next thing I need to do is I'll put this mount onto the case, probably around about there, and then we can stick the fans on. Alright, let me do that. So I've just put the radiator in place with 4 screws at the moment, just to confirm the fit. I can always slide it back and forth or move it to the next bay, but that looks like that will sit okay there. And now we just need to put the fans onto the radiator, and I'll put all the cables at the bottom back so that we'll go through the cable pass-throughs, and we'll screw the 3 radiators on there. Alright, so what I'm doing, I'm just cleaning off the pre-applied thermal compound off the bottom of the block, and I'll give the CPU a clean just to remove any fingerprints. So I'm just using some alcohol microfiber cloth, and the reason I'm doing that is I've got my own Hydronaut, Thermal Grizzly Hydronaut thermal compound that I'm going to use instead. So I'm just going to put a blob of this, if it doesn't shoot out at 1,000,000 miles an hour, just starting to come out, there we go. And using a bit of plastic from the SSD box, I'm just going to spread that on the surface to keep it nice and thin, and then it'll mush out when it gets to cooler. So remembering the orientation I was going to do before, I can apply that to there and get the thumb screws. And obviously we want this to be even, so I haven't tightened anything down yet, just screwing them to catch the threads, and then I can tighten down the diagonals, just feeling take up the slack, just loosen them off a bit, it doesn't feel level, or equal I should say. Next up I'm going to install the RAM. So we'll get that out of the box, open up the clips and get them the right way around. It's 1, 2, 3 and 4. Okay, so now it's fans. So what I'm thinking of doing, so I've got 3 of the 140 fans. I'm thinking of putting these down here. So they'll be coming as intakes, so we'll put a big positive pressure on the system. So if you look at the case, the side panel has all air filters as well on there, so there's no issues taking in air. So these would be on the side panel at the right, so thinking of these 3 fans like that. And then along the bottom, again, we've got dust filter that comes out of this tray here, of having 4 fans running along here. It'll take 4 120s in that space. And then for the exhaust, we've obviously got the CPU cooler at the top, and also this rear fan will go on here. So that's another 120, pulling air out the back. Obviously there's no filtration there, which is fine for an exhaust. And then obviously if it's positive pressure, all these gaps and everything in the system should keep all the air moving out the way and reduce dust getting into the unit. So I am going to go and screw all these in. Alright, so that's all the fans in. In the end I could not fit 4 120 fans along the bottom. Must be the dimensions of the fan, but I thought you could get 4 in there. I was obviously wrong, so I've put 3 in towards the opening of the intake at the bottom, moving towards the front, because obviously the GPU is going to sit around about here, so that'll feed cold air in there. And I've got the 3 140 fans at the back, bringing fresh air in through the back of the case, or the side of the case I should say. And then I had to move the motherboard tray down to its lower position, so I was removing these 2 thumb screws and these 2 thumb screws, and that allowed me to slide it down, and just swapping over a spacer from this side to this side with this 1 thumb screw here, and then that allowed me to get the 2 exhaust fans on the rear. So in theory, we'll have the GPU will be sat across here, we'll get fresh air coming in here, fresh air coming in here, and then exhausting the hot air out the back and out the top. So now I think it's time to start thinking about some cabling. Alright, so what I've done to give me more room for cabling, because as you can imagine there's quite a bit with all those fans and the fan controllers and everything still to install. So here's the swing door for the SSDs. Not that I'm going to be using that either, but it'll do for holding in cables and potentially mounting some of the fan equipment. I've removed the two swing drawers that hold the 3.5-inch bays. Because as I said, I'm not going to be installing hard disks in here because I've got an external NAS, and if I want to put more storage in here, I've still got two M.2 bays in the machine, or is it 3? I can't remember now. So anyway, I've took those out, and that'll give me lots of room here for cabling because all the modular connections are on the back here, and it gives me access as well to clearly get through all of the pass-throughs for the cabling. So hopefully that'll be a bit better. Alright, so what I've done is I've installed all the cabling for the system so far. I've got the two power cables at the top of the motherboard, as well as the AIO pump controller and its RGB. I've also got the ATX main power supply, the USB cables, and along the bottom all the front panel connectors, etc. are all installed. And what I've also done is I've 3D printed some PLACF covers, and these have clipped in around the spaces around the bottom of the fans and along the back of the fans, just to stop unnecessary air leakage and circulating around through the fans. I've also installed the graphics support bracket. It's quite a large GPU that's going in here, so there was two options for mounting it. So I'll try it in this way, see how it sits. If it doesn't, I can always mount it in the other orientation. Alright, and around the back there's a rat's nest of cables. So I've got the two fan controllers, so the IQ Commander and the RGB hub, and they're linked together, and then all the other cables for the fans. There's all this loose stuff, and I'll tidy all that up once I know everything is working as it should. The only one issue I do have is the motherboard only has one connection for the front panel USB port, so I will look in the future to get a PCIe extender to bring a small adapter card round to the back here to pick up the second set of USB ports. So it does mean in the meantime at the front of the unit, out of the 4 Type A USBs, I can only use 2 of them, which isn't a big deal for the time being. Alright, so here is the GPU, and power connectors are at the top here in the middle, and front is a double plate, although it's a 3.5 card, it's a double plate, and it's got 2 HDMI connectors and 3 DisplayPort connectors, and there's another couple of connectors here which I think are part of the Aura Sync for the RGBs. So what I need to do first, if I lay the card down, is I need to open up these two, second and third I think it is, going by the layout. So I need to remove the thumb screw off the back of the box, and that will allow me to remove 2 of these brackets, or covers I should say. Now we can drop the GPU in. Now there is this button here which is the Q release, which unlocks the port, so I need to make sure that that snaps in correctly, and GPU should just sit. Get it lined up. Now I have opened up the GPU bracket to its maximum height, and let's encourage this into slot. And I think that is it, all firmly in place. Close up the bracket at the rear to clamp the card down, and put the thumb screw back in. And now we can adjust the height by pressing this button and sliding it up to clamp the GPU to stop it sagging. Now it does also come with a support bracket, which is a magnetic base, but I don't have anywhere I could mount it due to the fan positioning. But with that rear bracket taking all the weight it should be all okay, and the fact that the front top of the card is actually clamped by the case, I don't think we'll have any issues there at all. So the next thing is cabling. So it comes with a 4-way adapter for taking out to the header, although I don't particularly like that, and the power supply, which is also an ROG unit, did come with a cable that only needs 2 supplies off the main PSU, and it is rated 600 watts, so I think we'll get away with that. I don't know if it'll make any difference to the card in terms of its performance or power limiting, but we'll soon find out. So 2 options for the cabling. I think I can either take it through the SAT back here, over and around the back, or I can take it over the top and underneath the motherboard. I don't think that looks particularly tidy, so I think I'm going to take it through the back here along with all the motherboard cables and the USB headers, and see if that, and I can always secure it along the top of the GPU here just to tidy things up a bit. So if you haven't seen on the internet, if these cables aren't fully corrected, there has been a lot of problems with these sockets melting just to the sheer load, so I do need to make sure it's fully engaged and clicked in properly so I don't end up facing the same issues as everybody else. So that's fully in and it has locked and it's secure, so I'll make sure it's fully engaged. And looking at the height, got no issues there, so I'll just tidy up these cables a little bit and we'll feed this through to the back. So I made a quick change. I didn't like the cable coming over the top here and going out the side, so I've taken it in underneath and through to the back into the power supply. Alright, so the next thing is to power it up and hope no magic smoke comes out and take it from there. So I have got HDMI cable plugged into my monitor. Eventually I'll swap it over to the display ports as I swap around all my monitors. I've got a power cable here which will plug in, and I've also got a keyboard and mouse just to get me going until I swap over my other unit so I can still use both PCs. So let's see what happens here. HDMI port, power supply on, motherboards come to life, and let's hit the start button. All the fans are turning. QLEDs, I don't know what that amber one is. RAM is still on, so it's maybe still got to do some memory training. Let me just see if I can find the input on the display. Oh, the RAM light's gone on. I've got a white LED there now, showing the liquid temperature is 25 degrees. It's just switched over to green light on the QLED status. And we've got a BIOS screen. It's showing all 128 gigabytes of RAM, it's showing the CPU, it's showing the motherboard, detected both the M.2 drives. It says there's no keyboard or mouse. It says new CPU installed. Great, so now I just need a keyboard and mouse. Let's plug in the dongle for the keyboard and mouse. And it detected the keyboard. So far so good. So, on that note, one machine built, and let's head over to part 3. We'll get some software installed and see exactly how this thing behaves. We'll catch you in part 3.